Yet another radical Islamic terrorist has been apprehended in the United States after coming into the country through one of the many, many lax visa programs implemented under the Biden presidency. Now look, we have a large country, and there are always going to be gaps in the system, people who slip through the cracks in the border or overstay their visas. But after we've passed the 200 mark of known terrorists we accidentally let into the country, I think it's safe to ask the question, why aren't we fixing this problem? I've thought a lot about it, and I finally came to a conclusion. If we started deporting people who hate America and want to bring down the entire system, we would be getting rid of the Democrats' main voter base. We would be left with a country of patriotic Republicans and maybe 7 Democrats who haven't yet figured out their party is bonkers. So I can see why Kamala Harris and Joe Biden are content to put their head in the sand and ignore their glaring failures when it comes to immigration. I'm Tyler Chrestman. Welcome to the Chrestman Conversation. Okay. Hello, everyone. This week, we have 3 topics that I'm going to cover. The first one we're going to talk about is the Donald Trump and tariffs. We're going to do a little history, going to get into that, going to have some fun. We're going to talk about the arrest of an ISIS terrorist in Oklahoma, and then we're going to talk about everyone's favorite topic, which is the election. So those are our big 3 today. Oh, hello, Winnie. Come up here. Those are our big 3 for this week. But first, our favorite comment from last week. Our favorite comment comes from Tom, who said, quote, Vance mopped the floor with Tampon Timmy, end quote. My gosh, Tom. So disrespectful. I for one, feel bad for Tim Walz because I would be embarrassed to be outclassed so badly. Oh, my gosh, this cat. Again, second week in a row, you've jumped up on the desk. What's your deal? Get down. What are you doing? My goodness. I'm sorry, people. She wants to be a star. I would be embarrassed if I got outclassed that badly. So I actually, at this particular moment in time, feel a little bad for Tim Walz because he is so far out of his element that if he had any shame, he would probably be a little ashamed. But luckily for him, I don't think he does. Anyway, on to our first topic for the week. We're going to talk about tariffs. We're going to get into it. Most people don't understand tariffs. What are they? Are they good? Are they bad? How about some history? Most people don't really know much about them. To be honest, sometimes when Donald Trump is talking about tariffs, he sounds like he really understands what he's talking about, and other times he sounds like he doesn't. And so we're going to get into all that. But I want to go over a little bit about tariffs because I feel like most people don't know anything about them. And that's fine. You don't have to know about everything, but we're going to do a little education here to start off. Tariffs I guess it would actually be the majority of the history of the United States. Tariffs were the main source of revenue for the government. And there are some good arguments on both sides of this equation of whether or not tariffs are good in the modern day or whether they're bad or who is affected by them or whatever. We're going to go into some of those arguments, but I want to go through the specifics of Donald Trump's tariff plan before we do that. So when Donald Trump was president, he was a big fan of tariffs, and he imposed tariffs he had $80 billion basically worth of tariffs on products. I think there was something like $320 billion worth of products had tariffs on them, and he basically made $80 billion for the government through his tariff program in 2018 and 2019. Now, all these tariffs they had a specific purpose in mind when he was doing it. A lot of them are what's known as protectionist tariffs. He was trying to balance out some unfair trade practices between us and China, as well as doing some, well, we'll get into that later as to exactly why. But a lot of it was due to a trade standoff he was having with China because of this trade imbalance. But he implemented a bunch of tariffs when he was president the first time. And when Joe Biden became president, he actually kept most of those tariffs in place. He cut some of them back, but most of them he kept in place, and he actually added additional tariffs on Chinese goods, about $18 billion worth of Chinese goods. He put additional tariffs on. So presidents, Democrat and Republican throughout history, have used tariffs. I don't believe, you'd have to fact check me on this, I don't believe there's ever a president who has not put tariffs on something. I believe that everyone uses them to some extent. It's just how much and on what they have used them on. And there are arguments we're going to get into in just a second. Donald Trump has said if he is elected again, so if he becomes president next year, He wants to impose basically a 10% tariff across the board, which means that everything that comes into the country, any imported good, is going to have a tariff placed on it, and possibly up to a 60% tariff on Chinese goods. I just realized I didn't say what a tariff is. So basically, a tariff, if you think about it, is a tax. A tariff is a tax. So you go and you buy something at a store, or you go and you out to eat, and the government imposes taxes on basically everything. So you're paying a sales tax. You go to the store, you pay a sales tax, 7-8%, whatever it is. So that's why you look at your receipt and you say, well, it said that it was $39.99 on the rack, and then you get up there and it's $42.57, and you go, well, where's that extra money? That extra money is the tax that you pay to typically the either state or local government, depending on what you're paying taxes for. But that's where the government is getting its revenue. It's getting its revenue through taxes. What a tariff is a tax on goods that are imported to the country. So something is made in China. It comes to the United States. You pay the company that imports the good. This is where people get confused. The company that imports the good. So let's say I own a company, whatever, the Chrestman Conversation. The Chrestman Conversation, we start buying things from China. I start importing large shipments of stuff from China. A tariff, if we have a tariff of 10%, what I'm doing is I'm paying to import these goods. And when they hit the port, I basically have to pay 10% of whatever I paid for the goods as kind of like a sales tax at the port to the government. So I buy something. I don't know. I buy a phone. I start importing phones from China, and I pay $100 for this phone from China. It comes in. When it comes in, I pay a tax on whatever I paid for it. So I paid $100. So if I'm paying 10%, I pay $10 to the U.S. government. That's my import tax, known as a tariff. Okay? That's kind of a simplistic version of what a tariff is. But basically, it's a tax paid on the importation of goods. So this is fine. Most people use taxes. Other countries use taxes. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about tariffs. We're talking about a cost, a tax that I will pay to import goods from other countries. Donald Trump uses William McKinley as his inspiration or hero when it comes to tariffs. William McKinley, he was a big fan of tariffs. They implemented it. There's actually a couple of charts you can look up. I should pull one up, but when you look at the history of tariffs throughout the United States, there are giant spikes. And when William McKinley was in Congress and the president, because he was a big fan of tariffs, he implemented high tariffs. And one of the things that happened is that these tariffs caused the largest federal government surplus in history. So basically, the tariffs outpaced government spending, and we had this giant boon of money at the federal government level. And that was a good thing. But it also, some people didn't like the tariffs and made William McKinley unpopular. There was a whole bunch of things that happened because of this. But basically, that's where Donald Trump, when he sounds like he knows what he's talking about on tariffs, he is talking about, when he's talking about the history, he's talking about William McKinley, he's saying why he wants this. I don't want you to get a mistake. So Donald Trump sometimes makes it seem like if he puts a tax on Chinese goods, if he puts a tariff on Chinese goods, that China is going to be paying that tax. It's not the way it works. American companies will pay the tax. Companies that are operating in America pay that tax, like a sales tax to the government. It's not the exporter. China doesn't have to pay to put its goods in the United States. It's the other way around. The United States has to pay, United States companies pay to import those goods. So sometimes he makes it sound like China is going to be paying for this. This could be true. And so this is where people, I think, misrepresent Donald Trump and kind of want to play him up like a big dummy, like he doesn't know what he's talking about. I think the problem for Donald Trump is that he doesn't always explain his thinking. So there are a couple ways that companies will respond when faced with high tariffs. Okay, you have different options. So Donald Trump comes, he puts 100% tariff on goods imported from China. Well, actually, that's a little extreme. We'll say he puts the 50%. He puts a 50% tariff on goods from China. So what do you do as an American company? You have options. One, you can elect not to import goods from China because the tax you're going to pay on the goods outweighs their benefit and costs down the road. So instead you import from somewhere else, or what people hope is you buy American, which would be good for America and keep jobs in America and be good for our country. So that's one option. You don't have to import from China because they have high tariffs. So you import from somewhere else or you buy American. So then you avoid the tax. The second option, if you're the company, is that you raise your prices because your profits now have gone down by 50% or whatever the case may be. Your profits have gone down substantially because of this giant tariff you have to pay. So you have to pass that on to consumers, which means that Americans pay a higher cost. Or option 3, you force the Chinese government that wants to export their goods to compensate you on their end. So they have to lower their prices to make up for your lost revenue on the tariff, and therefore China actually is eating a lot of the thing. Donald Trump hopes option 3 is what happens, or option 1, where you buy from America. He hopes those are the two options that could happen. Now, theoretically, yes, you might pay more because of a tariff, because it is a tax on Americans, and the tax is not going to just be eaten by most companies unless you're Arizona Tea. Shout out to the best tea company in the world. The companies are not going to eat those. They're going to try and pass those costs on somewhere else. That's what companies do. That's their job. They want to make revenue. I don't blame them. So that's their job. But Donald Trump hopes option 1, buy American, or option 3, pass the costs on to China, are what happens. We don't know which way it'll go, but those are the options. And it's not that Donald Trump is a big dummy when he says that China is going to pay for this. China will pay for this. They are going to export less goods, which is going to be bad for their economy, or they're going to eat some of these costs, which are going to be bad for their economy. The option of a 60% tax on Chinese goods is not going to be passed on to consumers because consumers won't buy Chinese products. Because at that point, Chinese products are going to be more expensive than other things, or as expensive as things made in America. And so therefore, we buy less from China, which kills their economy. Now, there's a bunch of reasons why tariffs can be a good thing. And I'm not, I think people who watch this show regularly know me. I'm not a big fan of taxes. I'm not a big fan of government spending. I think government spending and government regulation, these things are bad for the most part. We need to cut most of this stuff out. Tariffs do have some use. I'm not anti-tariff in a flat-out, we never have use. There's a couple reasons why tariffs can be a good thing. One is this concept called countervailing duties. And this is when another country, they basically subsidize an industry and then undercut U.S. producers. So think about China again. China will do things like they will subsidize their steel. Their steel industry is a great example. So their steel industry, what that means is the government is actually paying for a lot of the operating costs to manufacture steel. They're subsidizing it. They're giving people money to make a product. So what happens? If I have to, well, just because it's laying here on the desk, if you have to make this phone, I have to make a phone, and I'm just a businessman. I'm Apple. And I go, all right, I have to build this phone. Well, I have to get the material. I have to pay the workers. I have to design it. I have to assemble it. I have to do all these things, and all these things cost money to manufacture this phone. I manufacture the phone. Let's say it cost me, after all the calculations are done, it cost me $1,000 to make this phone. Well, and I go and charge $1,200 for it, and then I make a $200 profit on every phone because it cost me $1,000 to sell the phone. So what happens if the government comes in and says, hey, we're going to help you out. Here's $500, and you get to use that to make your phone. It's government money. You just get to have it. We're going to subsidize you. You basically just get this money. And then I cost the phone. Well, now the phone, it didn't cost me $1,000 to make, did it? It cost me $500 because $500 of that comes from the government. They don't expect me to return that money. They're subsidizing my industry. They want to help my industry. So then I've made this phone for $500. Well, what does that mean? That means I can make the same $200 profit if I sell this phone for $700. Well, that's great, except that my American counterparts, if I'm in China making this phone, my American counterparts, they can't do that. We're not subsidizing the phone industry. So it still costs them $1,000 to make this phone. They have to charge $1,200 for it. So then if I'm China, I export this phone to the United States. There might be a little bit of a cost in that, so I raise the price. It might be $800. But I can still sell the same phone for $800 importing from China than I can in America, where I have to sell it for $1,200 to make the same amount of money. So that's what we call countervailing duties. That's where a place is subsidizing something to undercut the U.S. markets. And there's a reason why they do this. And this is the other reason why tariffs are important. They call them anti-dumping laws. So let's imagine for a second, and this is what China did with their steel industry. So we're making a steel beam, whatever it is. We're making steel. And we make this steel, and it costs us $1,000 to make this steel. Okay, well, a company can't sell the steel for $800. They would be losing money on the steel. It makes no sense. Unless, specifically, the government is involved in undercutting the cost. So the government says, well, we'll do the same thing. We're going to float you money so that your business doesn't lose money, but you're going to sell your steel at a loss. And what that does is, so I'm in America. I make a steel beam. Cost me $1,000. You're in China. You make a steel beam. It costs $1,000. You then get a government subsidy on the incentive that you're going to sell for a loss. So I'm actually going to sell my beam, and every time I sell one for $800, I'm going to lose $200. But the government's going to compensate me for this. And why would I do this? What's the point of this? Well, it's the same thing that Amazon does, by the way. Amazon, there will be a product that sells. Socks. You buy socks from Amazon from a company that's small, and they make socks that you really like. And Amazon sees that people like these socks, but the company is small. Amazon makes a knockoff version of the sock. They then sell the socks for a price that loses money on the socks. So this company that makes the great socks, they sell the socks for $10. That makes them a $1 profit. Amazon comes in. They make the same $9 socks, a knockoff version. They sell them for $8. Every time they sell a pair of socks, they lose $1. Why would someone do this? Because what Amazon does is, Amazon knows it's a gigantic corporation. It can afford to lose $1 on every pair of socks it sells for a long time. You can't. You can't compete. People buy the Amazon brand. Your company shrivels and dies. Amazon then, after running you out of business, they raise the price of their socks to $12. Congratulations. You paid for cheap socks just long enough to run someone out of business, so then you can pay for more expensive socks. That's what governments do when they're dumping steel, for example, from China. And it's the most obvious example because it's an easy one to point to that historically has happened. So the government has a role here because what don't you want to happen? You don't want American steel, the American steel industry, to flounder. You don't want it to turn belly up and die. And China, because they play unfair, because they don't play by the rules, they will sell steel at a loss to run American companies into the ground. Then they'll buy up the bare bones of those companies, and then they own the companies, and they can raise the price of the steel to whatever the hell they want because now they're the ones making steel. So this is what China does. This is what companies and countries do. And there's a lot of countries that do this. A lot of countries impose tariffs. Tariffs work to prevent this kind of behavior. So when it comes to China, China steals intellectual property. They do not play fair by trade agreements. You want to buy furniture made in China? That's fine. If you want to go to China and buy furniture made in America, you can't do it. So they don't play fair with their trade agreements. They do not operate on the bounds of fair trade. And so there is a role here. And the reason why we're punishing China with these high tariffs is because they don't play fair, because they are rather deceptive in their practices. So those are the arguments for tariffs. And I think you could see that there is a role for tariffs in this scenario. You don't want China undercutting American companies to run them out of business. You don't want China to subsidize industry because they're a communist government. They can do what they want with their money to just prop up industries that if they were operating under the free market would fail. So when we have a free market here in the United States, we can't just subsidize industries. I don't think we should. I think we should cut subsidies to almost everything. And I think if everyone did that in the world, it would be better. If no one subsidized industry in their country, industries would rise and fall, but the competition between industries would make products better, would make goods and services cheaper. When you subsidize industries, all you do in the long run is you increase costs. That's what's going to happen. So anyway, there is a role. And I think that people are being unfair to Donald Trump when they talk about this role and what they don't understand tariffs and they don't understand the reason or the rationale. I'm not even saying they're all a good idea. I'm not saying that every idea about tariffs that Donald Trump has is right or good. I'm just saying there is an argument for them that makes sense. Yesterday, I was trying to do some research on this topic, and I was Googling a little. I was searching on the internet, looking for, I'd type in something like Donald Trump's tariff policy. And it is amazing to me. It's amazing to me how biased our search results are. It still boggles my mind. I know this, but it's still just, you can't fathom it until you do something like this. I just made a case here for the last 10 minutes, last 19 minutes, about Donald Trump's tariffs and whether or not they're good or bad. I made a case. I'm not saying I endorse them all. I'm just saying there's an argument, a historical argument based on a lot of precedent and based on some very well-known things about China and free trade. When you look up Donald Trump's tariff policy, I had a very difficult time finding one article to talk positively about it. I know that there are arguments out there. I'm familiar with the arguments. I was just trying to find some facts about numbers that they would throw out. Every article was about how Donald Trump's tariff policy is going to bankrupt the United States, and it's terrible, and it's bad, and this is all this. And I go, this is just wild how biased the search results are on Google. It is terrible. And I remember why I stopped using it, because it drove me nuts to even just look at that. I use Quant normally for my search, but Quant, for whatever reason, the search bar on my computer was messing up, so I was Googling yesterday, and it just reminded me why I don't use Google. Anyway, okay. Questions about tariffs would be appreciated. I'm sure I missed something, or I'm sure it still can be a little confusing. So any questions you have about tariffs, just feel free to shoot them to me, and I'll try and answer them on the next podcast. But we right now are going to move on to topic number 2. A young man, 27-year-old man named Nasir Ahmed Tawhidi, I believe is how the last name is pronounced, Nasir Ahmed Tawhidi. 27-year-old man was arrested in Oklahoma City this week for plotting a terrorist attack. The DOJ released some information. It said Tawhidi was planning on using some weapons to commit a mass shooting on Election Day. That basically was summarized his plan. So he had taken steps that include liquidating all his assets. He sold his house. He was moving his family overseas. So I think his wife, maybe, he moved her overseas. And then he bought 2 AK-47s and 500 rounds of ammunition. So he had all this stuff going. It was a plan in the making. And I guess they caught him in a sting operation. The FBI caught him in a sting operation where he was attempting to buy the weapons. They have text messages that implicate him. They have all sorts of things. And he also, I guess his wife's underage brother was his accomplice. So these 2 men were arrested. Why are we talking about this? Good. You know what? The FBI, good on them for doing their job, foiling terrorist plots. This is great. This is the second time in as many months that the FBI has been on top of it. So we always like when that happens, when they do their job. Why are we talking about this? We're talking about this because the problem is that Tawhidi entered the country in September of 2021 on a special immigrant visa from Afghanistan. So 1 month after the disastrous Afghanistan debacle that happened, this guy gets a special visa to come into the United States from Afghanistan. This is a gigantic issue that they actually were talking about when it came to the Haitians. J.D. Vance made this point. So you grant someone a visa. It doesn't mean that that person is a legal resident of the United States. This guy's been in the country for 3 years. He's not had a court date about his visa because our court system is so backlogged with visas that it's impossible. This guy just gets to live in the country for years and years and years, plot to kill Americans on Election Day, and he's never even been seen in court to determine whether or not he should be in the country. He just was given a visa to come here to live in the country. This is exactly what J.D. Vance was talking about when it came to the Haitians. Waving a magic wand and saying you have a visa doesn't make someone a legal resident. And also, it does not mean that the immigration system is all well and good because you got a visa. Because somebody has a visa, because they are granted a permission to be here, it doesn't mean that the immigration system is working well. In fact, it's not working at all when a person like this is allowed to live in the country for 3 years, all the while hating the country and wanting to kill Americans. This is a gigantic problem. It's embarrassing, first of all, to the rest of the world for America to look this inept, that we let people into the country who want to destroy the country. This is not a good idea for anyone to do. And this comes on the heels or I guess it was a couple months ago. It was in June. In June, there were 8 men from Tajikistan who were arrested. We talked about it on the podcast. New York, Philadelphia, Los Angeles. There were a bunch of people who were arrested for plotting another terrorist attack that all came through the southern border. And we said, okay, so we knew these guys were on the terror watch list when they came through the southern border. But we released them into the interior of the United States, and it took us months to track them down and try and find them so we could arrest them. This is a failure of a country. We're a giant country. I can't get through the airport without my ID. I need my passport. I need my driver's license. I have to go through TSA. They screen me at a metal detector. They do all this stuff at an airport in St. Louis and every airport in the country. Yet people can walk through the southern border on the terrorist watch list and be given a plane ticket to fly up to New York where they can live. This is wild to me. This is a failure of the Biden administration that is unquantifiable. You cannot estimate how bad this could turn out. Now, I'm glad, once again, I'm glad the FBI is doing their job and finding these people and hunting them down and arresting them, and we will send them to prison for forever. That would be great. That is what the FBI is supposed to do. Congratulations on them. They're doing their job. That's awesome. But this shouldn't have happened in the first place. There shouldn't be a need for the FBI to be working like this. We're letting the enemies of this country into the country to undermine the country and destroy the country because in a misguided sense of compassion, as if it's nice. We just have to let everyone in because that's the nice thing to do. It's not the nice thing to do. The people who want to use democracy against itself, the people who want to use our compassion and our caring about other people against us, those people are going to take advantage of us. This is why the idea of pacifism is morally inept. It doesn't make any sense. You can't just lay down to people who want to destroy you and hope what? I remember there's a Gandhi quote. I'm not trying to pick on Gandhi here, but Gandhi practiced nonviolent pacifism in the face of oppression. That only works against an enemy who is moral. The reason why Gandhi could do that is because the British, whatever you want to say about them, were a very moral people. They wouldn't stand for this guy who wanted to do a hunger strike, was going to kill himself, was showing this resistance. The reason why in the United States, nonviolent pacifism, Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights movement, the reason why that worked, even though they themselves were met with violence in a lot of cases, the reason why it worked is because the majority of Americans were not violent, and they don't like violence, and they're moral people who said this is ridiculous. You get these people peaceably marching, and you're going to beat them up, and people saw this and said this is disgusting. It's not because those people who were violent, racists, and bigots were ultimately convinced that they were wrong. That's actually not why. It's because the majority of people who didn't have opinions or didn't care or were inspired by looking at the people acting immorally and said, I don't want to be on that guy's side. That guy's immoral. Pacifism doesn't work against an enemy who wants to murder you. So if, for example, all of America was as racist as the people who sicked the dogs on civil rights protesters, if all of America was that person, black people never get rights in this country because there's no one whose mind you're going to change. The people who want to kill America, this guy, Nasir Tawhidi, you cannot be compassionate and peaceful and pacifist in the face of radical Islamic terrorism. You can't do it because they want to kill you. It's like the people who say that the Jews in Israel should be peaceful or they have to operate a ceasefire, they have to do this, they have to do that. These people are mistaken. A ceasefire is not in Israel's best interest because if they practice pacifism, if they laid down, they would be destroyed because the people who want to kill them want to commit a genocide. They want to destroy the country. They don't want peace. They want the destruction of Israel. The people we're letting into this country, people like Nasir Tawhidi, they want to destroy America. We're not going to convince them. We're not going to show them, well, look, this is what a red robin looks like. Aren't you glad? Wouldn't you like this in Afghanistan? Oh, great. Yeah, we're all friends now. No, they don't care. They don't, oh, look, we call this a mall. This is Lululemon. You can wear stretchy pants and you'll be happy. No, they don't care. That's not what they're here for. They're not here to explore capitalism or freedom or secularism. That's not what they want. What they want is the destruction of America, and they're using the compassion of the left against itself. This idea that you are so tolerant that you actually will tolerate intolerance. These people this guy, I'm going to venture a guess, he doesn't believe the same thing most people on the left. He doesn't like the policies of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. He got into the country. But a guy who wants to kill Americans in the name of jihad, a guy who wants to do that, he doesn't like gay people. I can guarantee you this. He's not a fan of these queers for Palestine. He would probably murder them if he had the opportunity. He doesn't like feminism. He doesn't like people who practice other religions or people who have no religion. He doesn't like these people. He wants to kill them. And yet, the same people who are all these things will say, well, we need open borders. We need to have a more relaxed immigration. Oh, it's inhumane to build a wall on the southern border. These people are living in a fantasy world, and I don't understand it whatsoever. I know that there's a giant problem for Americans and Democrats. How do you vet people? I know my ideas. If I, as a Democrat, though, how do we determine who should come in and out of the country? I don't know the answer. If I'm trying to steelman the Democrat side of this argument, and I say, okay, what's your solution? Who should come in and who should not? Because I hear it all the time. They say, Democrats don't want open borders. Okay, all right. Well, tell me who comes in and who doesn't. Like, who do we stop from coming in? What's the answer to that? Why should we not let people come in? I don't know what the Democrats say to that. Because even when they say they don't want open borders, you say, well, who doesn't get to come in then? I don't know what their answer is. Because it seems like everybody gets to come in if they want to come in. I know my answer. My answer is we should vet people for their ideas. That's my answer. Because there are certain people who hold certain ideas that we shouldn't let into the country. And here's one. Do you believe in Sharia law? That Sharia law should be practiced? Yes? Okay, you don't get to come into America. Well, Tyler, how can you do that? Isn't that discriminatory against religion? No, it's not. There are a lot of Muslims in the world who do not believe in Sharia law. There are a lot of Muslims who treat their faith the way that a lot of Catholics in the United States treat their faith. They believe, but they're not really that serious about it. And that's fine. But if you're the kind of person who says, I believe in Sharia law, I think it should be practiced in the United States, okay, you don't get to come in. No visa for you. I'm sorry. You can say that that's discriminatory against Muslims. I would disagree. I don't think it is. Because, again, Islam, you're not saying, well, you're Muslim, you can't come in. You're saying, what do you believe? Oh, you believe in Sharia law. Do you believe that people who practice apostasy should be put to death? That's a question. People could lie, absolutely. But a lot of people wouldn't lie because a lot of people don't think that that's wrong to say. Yes, I think apostates should be put to death. You don't get to come into America. Again, there's probably a million things you could ask people as to whether or not they should come into the country or not. I think you vet people by their ideas, and I think that there's nothing wrong with that. Do you believe that female genital mutilation is an appropriate thing to do to an 11-year-old girl? Okay, you don't get to come into America. It's illegal here. Go practice that in Sudan. Okay, you don't get to do that here. Or if you do, send them to prison for a long time because that's a horrible, horrific thing to do. So to me, I see the Democrats' problem, why they can't talk about this, because they don't have an answer to the question, how do you stop people from coming into the country? And why should some people not be allowed in? Again, I know my answer. I know the Republican answer. I don't know the Democrat answer. And that's why this topic is just avoided. And why people like Nasir Tawhidi are going to continue to get into the country. And when we have our next terrorist attack inside the United States soil, I'm almost positive you're going to find a guy who they'll say, oh, well, he was on our radar. Well, yeah, because he was encountered at the southern border and then released into the interior. Or he was here on a visa that was approved and he overstayed his welcome because our immigration system is a joke. We don't deport people who break the law. It's that simple. Anyway, all right. That's all I have to say on that one. I want to talk very briefly, and we're at the 33-minute mark, so I'm going to try and be brief about this, about the election. I know we talk about it every week, and what are you going to do? We have a month until the election, so we are running out of time here when it comes to talking about it, and then I'll be glad to not talk about it, hopefully after Donald Trump wins, but you never know. I've seen some polling data out here. Oh, let's say this first off. Anyone who tells you they know who's going to win, oh, I know who's going to win. Kamala's up in this poll. But Donald Trump, he looks great in these polls. And I saw this, and I see this pattern, and I blah, blah, blah. Anyone who tells you they know, they're lying. This is a toss-up race. You could say it tips one way. You can say it tips the other way. You wouldn't be wrong on either case. It is a toss-up. Either person could easily win this election. I want to say this, though. I have seen some interesting data come out this last week. There's some polling done in all the swing states. So they have, right now, I think it's seven swing states that they say really could go either way. They're within a point. They're within a couple points. They really don't know who's going to win. And historically, in the last couple elections, the polls, state-by-state polling, have not been great. So we have all these polls coming out. And what you've seen is, you saw when Kamala Harris became the nominee, she had a pretty big bump, and then it went up just a tiny bit, and then it sort of stalled out. Somewhere between 45 and 49%. She hit a ceiling. She just doesn't have that appeal. And then, if anything, it sort of backed off a little bit, sort of backtracked just a smidge. And Donald Trump has always remained steady. If anything, he's gotten a little bit more popular in the last month. And these polls that came out of the swing states, particularly Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, are really interesting because what I'm seeing, or what I think I'm seeing, is that Donald Trump could win these states, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. Michigan, maybe. Kamala Harris seems like she'll probably win Michigan, but you actually don't know because the state-by-state polling is not great in the last couple elections. Now, I think you'll see nationally, Kamala Harris will win the popular vote. No one cares. We could go into the Electoral College. We probably will at some point again. We'll do one every 4 years. We'll go over why the Electoral College is great and why we need it, but we're not going to do it today. I just want to say that with the polling data being what it is, Donald Trump could win this election, and we need to behave as though he will win this election, which means that we need to get people out to vote. We need to encourage people to vote now. If you have the option, just go vote today. Go vote. Go vote right now. There's nothing that's stopping you. You don't need to wait till Election Day. If you can early vote, you might as well do it. I'm not for early voting, but if it's the law, then you play by the law. And if that's the law, then go do it. But it easily could go the other way. And I want people to realize this. No matter who wins, there will be a day after and a day after and a day after. America is not going to sink overnight. It's not going to happen. The next 4 years could be really difficult. And if the Democrats cheat after they win, which seems likely, then it could be difficult for a long time. The Democrats, by the way, they will cheat. They want to talk about Donald Trump being a threat to democracy. At the same time, they want to get rid of the filibuster and pack the Supreme Court and add 2 states to the union, guaranteeing a Democratic supermajority in the Senate for the foreseeable future. Democrats want to cheat. Don't get this wrong. They are a threat to democracy more than Donald Trump ever will be. And so there could be bad, but the country will go on. Everything will be okay. We'll figure it out. But right now, I just want you to realize that these swing state polls, if I was a Kamala Harris supporter, I would not be happy with where she's sitting at. Donald Trump is polling better right now than he's ever polled before. And he won an election polling worse than he's polling right now. So who knows? We don't know where it is. We don't know what's going to happen. It's too close to make predictions. But you have to behave as though Donald Trump could win and then make that happen in whatever way you can. Convince people to vote for him or register some people to vote. Do whatever you need to do. Make sure you vote, but just make sure to get it done because we're running out of time, and we want Donald Trump to be the president because it would be better than a Kamala Harris presidency for sure. Anyway, we're going to leave it there for the day. As always, questions, comments, concerns, leave them down on YouTube, Facebook, or Rumble, and we'll get back to them next week. And, if you make your comments funny or nasty or mean, we'll definitely read them on air because those are the ones that amuse me the most. So I will catch you guys next Friday.